So we wanted to bring you some breaking news, an ongoing story out of Atlanta. It sparked more protests and actually the burning of a Wendy's and the surrounding area. So this all started Friday night, another officer-involved killing of a black man who was not armed with a lethal weapon. That man is named Rayshard Brooks. And essentially what happened here, and we do have a lot of video, so we have a lot of a fairly thorough understanding of exactly what transpired, is the police received calls because he was sleeping in his car in a Wendy's drive-thru and cars were having to go around him in order to get his food. We have some video here warning some of this is disturbing, and this is a compilation of both body camera footage and cell phone footage from onlookers at the scene. Let's take a look at some of what transpired.
Hey.
Copy 41 no injury.
Sir.
25 westbound at Jones.
What's up, man?
25 west.
Hey, you're parked in the drive-thru right now. Hey, sir. My man. Man, you doesn't mean go back to sleep. You gotta move your car. You went back to sleep.
The reason why we're here is because somebody called 911 because you were asleep behind the wheel while you're in the drive-thru, right?
So you see him here. First of all, everything is going pretty okay. You know, everybody's calm. They give him a breathalyzer. And then when they move to arrest him is when he begins to resist. You see a struggle here on the ground. He's able to get a taser out of the hands of one of the officers. And then he takes off running with the taser. You can see him running here. That's Mr. Brooks. And if you watch in this surveillance footage, you can see him running. At one point, he actually turns and tries to sort of wildly fire the taser. Again, this is a taser. It's not a weapon that he has. And it's at that point that the police officer shoots him 3 times, I believe, in the back. He's taken to the hospital where he ultimately dies. The political fallout has been immediate. The fallout on the street has been immediate. Mass protests, as I mentioned, they set fire to that Wendy's. The police chief of Atlanta has stepped down. The officer who actually fired the fatal shots there has been terminated from the police force. The other officer who was involved has been placed on administrative leave. So that's what we know at this point. And like I said, there's a lot of footage here, and it's essentially very calm. Mr. Brooks is cooperating with the police. He's intoxicated. That's what they find from the breathalyzer test. And then it's when they move to arrest him that things really, really go off the rails and, you know, end in this just horrific and frankly unconscionable way.
Yeah, I was just reading a timeline on this as well. I think it was right in between failing the sobriety test and being behind the vehicle, moving to the arrest is when things got violent, and that's really the situation that unfolded here. And I think you mentioned this, but the officer involved was fired from the police, and then we also saw the other officer who was placed on administrative leave. So I mean, obviously it just shows that the city is a tinderbox. But I think we should mention is that this is a much more complicated situation than what happened with George Floyd. I mean, this is a person who did steal a taser from a police officer, and it's not a, you know, like police are allowed to arrest people for being intoxicated behind a vehicle or for driving a vehicle. I don't think that the shooting necessarily was justified. But I do think that this is something that's going to be very difficult to navigate around, which is that there are people who attack police officers whenever they're trying to be arrested. And we can't just say, you know, overall as a country, that it is never justified in order for an officer to defend themselves. Again, I'm not saying that that was particular in this case, but I've seen a lot of sweeping calls for saying that this is another instance similar to George Floyd, and I just don't think that's true.
Well, here's what I would say. You're right. You know, we've seen Ben Carson, I believe, come out and say that this was a more complicated situation. However, when you're shooting someone who's running away in the back, pretty hard to make the case that you were threatened in that moment. I think it's also important to have the context that, you know, these police-involved shootings that we have here so regularly, this doesn't happen in other countries. I was looking at the stats. In the UK, from the year 1900 through now, there have been 50 people, 50, that's it, in all those years who have been killed by the police. For contrast, in 1 month, March of 2016, 100 people, double that, were killed by police in the U.S. So to me, Saagar, I think there's I look at this situation and I think, how did it end up escalating so badly? When you start with someone who's just sleeping in a drive-thru in a Wendy's, big deal, who's cooperating to start with, for me, it makes me question why we have this response in this country, why so often these situations escalate and wind up in shooting when, you know, you've got someone like Dylan Roof, who they're able to apprehend nonviolently and take into custody, and countries around the world are able to manage this. Why aren't we? So I think that's the question, especially with him being shot in the back. To me, that does make it clear cut. To me, that does make it that these officers were not facing imminent threat. He had a taser. That's not a lethal weapon. And so, you know, it's hard for me to understand how that violence could be justified in that situation.
So I think you're right on the shooting part, but I think that on the arrest part, look, I mean, some people don't like to be arrested, especially when they're drunk. And I think that the missing context from the shooting stat is that 7 out of the 10 of the deadly shootings in America from police officers, both to white and black, is that they have a deadly weapon on them. 6 out of the 10 actually have a gun on them. And the truth is, we have a lot of guns in this country, and a lot of people are armed, and some people have knives. And even in some of the cases of unarmed shootings, almost all of them entail, you know, the use of a vehicle or the use of some other way in order to try and hurt somebody. So it's very easy to try and paint monolithic pictures of how things are here versus elsewhere. But, you know, the structure of what we've decided, the Second Amendment and much more, has made it so that the way that we police in this country is fundamentally different from other places. You can say whether that's good or bad, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I just look at that situation and, you know, I watch the whole video, and you just ask yourself, how come this couldn't have been de-escalated? Why did he have to be arrested? Why couldn't he just, you know, walk to his sister, call a family member to come pick him up? Why did it have to end up in this situation? So anyway, you know, we're going to keep an eye on what's going on in Atlanta. As you said, country obviously a tinderbox, and this is another sort of flashpoint that is adding fuel to that fire as protests continue in Atlanta, and we're going to keep on it and keep you updated on any developments there.
Absolutely. All right, we'll have more Rising for you right after this.